Hello and welcome to today's edition of Daf Yomi, carrying on from the previous Daf 83 Amud B. The Gemara provides the biblical sources for the ruling of the Brayta. The source for the ruling concerning the Omer offering as it is written, and when you shall bring a meal offering on the first fruits to the Lord, it is ripened grain, toasted over fire, even gross of the fresh air, you shall bring the meal offerings of the first fruits to Leviticus 2:14. To purpose repetition of the term you shall bring, teaches that the Omer is valid even if brought from an old crop that was stored in the attic. So what's the footnote? V'afinu min ha'aliyah. The two loaves must be brought from the produce of the Eretz Yisrael from the new crop. If such produce was not found, it may be brought from the produce of an old crop. This is according to the opinion cited in the Brayta and not the Mishnah. Rambam says for very Timidi Misofim 8:2, you can see Mishnah and the Lechem Mishnah there. The source for the ruling concerning the two loaves as it is written, and you shall offer a new meal offering to the Lord from your dwellings, and you shall bring 2 wave loaves. This is 23:16-17. The term your dwellings is a reference to Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, the verse indicates that the 2 loaves must be brought from grain grown there, and not from outside of Eretz Yisrael. Furthermore, the term from your dwellings teaches that the offering may come from any grain grown in Eretz Yisrael, and even from an old crop that was stored in the attic. The Gemara asks how 2 halachot can be derived from the same term. Didn't you already expound that term to teach that one can use grain only if it's grown in Eretz Yisrael? How can you also derive from it that the grain can be bought from an old crop? The Gemara explains that is derived from the next term, as the verse states, from your dwellings you shall bring in Leviticus 23:17, which teaches that one may bring them from any grain grown in Eretz Yisrael, even from an old crop that was stored away in the attic. The Gemara questions this answer, but that term is necessary to teach that any leavened bread offering that you bring in another instance, i.e. the loaves of a thanks offering, is to be like this offering of the 2 loaves, i.e. the same requirements apply to it. How then can you expand the term to also teach that grain from an old crop can be used for the 2 loaves? The Gemara explains, if so, that the term is written only to teach about the requirements for the other leavened bread offerings, and let the verse write, you shall bring, tavi, using the singular form. For what reason then does it write, you shall bring, taviu, using the plural form? It is written so that one can learn from it 2 different halachot. And Gemara questions the ruling of the Brayta, that the Omer and the 2 loaves are valid even if bought from an old crop. But isn't the term first written with regard to both the Omer and the 2 loaves? It indicates that they must come from the new crop. The Omer is referred to as the first of your harvest, Leviticus 23:10, and 2 loaves are referred to as offering of the first, Leviticus 2:12. Well, answers, the term indicates that only the new crop should be used, but that is only for the proper fulfillment of the mitzvah. If an old crop was used, the offerings are still valid. He will ask, but isn't it written with regard to the 2 loaves, a new meal offering in Leviticus 23:16, which indicates that only the new crop can be used? The fact that with regard to the 2 loaves, the Torah repeats this requirement twice suggests it is indispensable. The Gemara answers, the word new cannot teach that the use of the new crop is essential, as is necessary for that which is taught in a Brayta. And Menachot Daf said that even if the 2 loaves are bought from the old crop, they are valid. However, is the meaning of a new meal offering. This teaches that the 2 loaves are to be the first of all the other meal offerings. No other meal offering may be bought from the new crop until the meal offering to those has been brought. The Gemara defines the limits of the dispute between the Mishnah and the Brayta. They agree only with regard to whether it is essential for the Omer and the 2 loaves to be brought from the new crop. And now we move on to the next Daf 84 Amud A. With regard to the requirement to use grain grown in Eretz Yisrael, they do not disagree if the Omer and the 2 loaves come from Eretz Yisrael. Indeed, they are valid. But if they come from outside of Eretz Yisrael, they are not valid. In accordance with whose opinion is this? It is not in accordance with the opinion of this following Tana. As it's on the Brayta, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Huda said that the Omer may come from outside of Eretz Yisrael. What does that mean? Omer ba michutza la'oretz. The later commentators engaged in a dispute concerning the meaning of Rabbi Yossi's statement. Some note that the expression the Omer may come. It suggests that produce from outside Eretz Yisrael may be used Abba B'nisha, Karen Ora. Others note that the Mishnah 64b clearly states that the Omer should be ideally be brought from a location close to Jerusalem, so clearly the statement here should not be taken as describing the ideal. And that's from the Sfas Emes or Sameach. How do I realize the meaning of the verse that instructs the obligation to bring the Omer? When you come into the land which I give to you, verse 22:10, this verse appears to indicate that the bringing of the Omer is strict to Eretz Yisrael. That verse teaches that the Jewish people are not obligated in the mitzvah of bringing the Omer before they entered Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara explains the basis of Rabbi Yossi's opinion, and we hold that even outside of Eretz Yisrael, consuming the new crop is prohibited by Torah, as it is written, from all your dwelling, Leviticus 20:17. The text of the Gemara is corrupt, as a term from all your dwellings, is actually written in a verse about the two loaves. There's no relevance to the court discussion. Yet, the verse detailing the prohibition against partaking of the new crop before the offering the Omer does contain a very similar phrase in all your dwellings. Leviticus 27:14. Some of the later commentaries therefore suggest modifying the Gemara's text by deleting the letter mem, representing the word from, so that the reference is to the latter verse in the Rashash. Another solution is presented by a variant text of the Gemara, found some manuscripts in which the term as it is written is omitted. Accordingly, the word from is not to be understood as being part of the verse cited, and as stating that the prohibition is derived from the term your dwellings, which indicates that the prohibition applies anywhere you dwell, even outside of Eretz Yisrael. Accordingly, the earlier verse which introduced the prohibition with when you come to the land which I give you in Leviticus 23:10 is a reference to the time of the Jewish people entering Eretz Yisrael, and indicates the prohibition takes effect only from that time. And since Rabbi Yossi holds that new crop outside of Eretz Yisrael is prohibited for consumption by Torah law, he consequently holds that one may also offer the Omer from crops grown there. We learned in the Mishnah elsewhere in Shekalim 4:1, the guards who are appointed by the court to protect some of the produce that grew without being purposely planted, the Sefihin, during the sabbatical year. Shomer Sefichin B'Shvius. During the sabbatical year, when the produce that grows in the fields is ownerless, the courts hire watchmen to guard some of the wheat and barley in order to ensure it will be available for the Omer offering and the two loaves. This was necessary as these offerings come only from the new crop. The wages for these guards was paid from the collection of the temple treasury chamber, and that's in the Rambam Sefer Zemanim Hilchos Shekalim 4:5. In order that it can be used for the Omer and the offering of the two loaves, collect their wages. Note in Zechon, even though the money from the collection of the chamber was generally reserved only for the purchase of offerings, it could be used for items that were needed in order to facilitate those offerings. Some explain that this is why the money that could be used to pay the guards as the work was necessary to ensure there be grain available for the mitzvah. Rabbi Avadia Bartano. Some compare this to the fact that the treasurer would use this money for the purchase of grain for the Omer and the two loaves. Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah, that's from the Meiri, from the collection of the temple treasury chamber. Mesrumas Lishka. The communal offerings brought in the temple must be purchased with funds collected for the sake of the current year. For these purposes, the year begins and ends on the 1st of Nisan. Each year, starting from around Purim, 2 weeks before the 1st of Nisan, donation of the half shekel per person were collected throughout the Jewish community and brought to Jerusalem. In addition, there were containers in the temple into which people could place their donations. One container was labeled new shekels, for the half shekel donation for the current year, and another container was labeled old shekels, for people to place their half shekel donation that they failed to give during the previous year. All the half shekels collected would then be placed in the temple treasury chamber, and 3 times a year before each of the pilgrimage kept festivals, funds would be taken from that chamber and placed in a special container. These funds were known as the collection of the chamber, and they were used to purchase the communal offerings. The funds that remained in the chamber were known as the remainder of the chamber. These funds were used for other purposes, both relating to the offerings. It's an amazing improvement of the temple structure. Rami Bahama raises a contradiction to Rav Chisda. We learned in our Mishnah that the guards of the Sephihin during the sabbatical year collect their wages from the collection of the temple treasury chamber. Thank you. It indicates that even in the sabbatical year, they already bought for that year's crop. And one can raise a contradiction to the Shema Brisa. The verse states, and the sabbatical year of the land shall be for you for eating. This is 25:6, which indicates that it is to be used for eating and not for burning. Accordingly, since the omer is burned on the altar, it shall not be bought from produce of the sabbatical year. This is said to the mitzvah said to you about the omer. It is a statute forever throughout your generation, in Leviticus 23:14, indicating that the mitzvah can be fulfilled at all times. And you say that the omer should be cancelled in the sabbatical year. Ramin Bahama said to him, but I'm saying that the omer should be cancelled. Certainly not. Let one bring the omer from grain as far as during the previous year, considering that which there's no prohibition against burning it. And Chis rejects this suggestion. But to fulfill the mitzvah, I require that the grain be of the fresh air, which is 2:14, i.e. young grain. And this requirement is not fulfilled with grain that had already sprouted during the previous year, as it has already been growing a long time. Rami Bahama persists, but let one bring the omer from the young grain that was cut during the harvest of the previous year, while it was still fresh. Now Chis rejects this suggestion. The verse says, fresh air you shall bring, in Leviticus 2:14. The exposition on the mitzvah to bring grain with the requirement that it be young indicates that it needed to still be young grain at the time of offering it. And this condition is not fulfilled if one uses grain from the previous year's harvest. Young grain is soft, see 66b, whereas grain that was reaped during the previous year would have become brittle. An Amoraic dispute was stated concerning the source of the halacha that the omer not be bought from the previous year's crop. Rabbi Yochanan is it derived from fresh air you shall bring, as Rav Chis explained, and Rabbi Elazar says it is derived from the fact that the omer is referred to as the first of your harvest. This is 23:10, which indicates that we bought only from the first of your harvest, i.e. from the finest produce of the current year's crop, and not from the last of your harvest, i.e. from produce taken from the remainder of the previous year's crop. Rabbi raises an objection. Rabbi Yochanan's opinion from a Brayta. The verse states that when you should bring a meal offering of the first fruits to the Lord, in Leviticus 2:14, the verse is speaking of the omer meal offering. From which type of grain does it come? It comes from barley. Menachot Omer, Menachot. It is a halacha transmitted to Moses from Sinai. Now the omer meal offering comes from barley, in accordance to the ruling of the Brayta. Ram Sefer Vod Hechem Timidim, Nahum 7:1. Do we say that it comes from barley, or do we say that it comes from wheat? Rabbi Elazar says that it is stated in the air with regard to the plague of hail in Egypt, and the flax and the barley were smitten, for the barley was in the air and the flax was in the bloom. In Exodus 9:31, and which is stated in the air with regard to the mitzvah of the new crop, which for all generations. Just as the term in the air that is stated with regard to the plague of hail in Egypt is referring to barley, it's clear from the next verse, where the wheat and the spelt were not smitten, for they ripened late. Exodus 9:32. So too the term in the air with regard to the new crop for all generations referred to barley. The Brayta cites another proof that the omer offering is bought from barley, and Rabbi Akiva says, I found an individual who brings his obligation for a meal offering from wheat, which is bought by a poor person for a false oath of testimony, a false oath of utterance, or for entering the temple while wishing impure, and one who brings the obligation of a meal offering from barley, in the case of a sinner's meal offering, or the meal offering of a sota. And we also found with the community that they bring the offering of a meal offering from wheat, in the case of the 2 loaves offering on Shavuot. And therefore, to keep the halacha of the offering of a community parallel to that individual, it should be a case where the community brings their obligation of meal offering from barley. And if you say that the offering comes from wheat, then we will not have found a case of a community that brings the obligation of a meal offering from barley. Consequently, it must be that the offering comes from barley. Rabbi Akiva suggests another proof. Alternatively, if you say that the offering comes from wheat, then the 2 loaves offering would not be brought from the first fruits. The verse states that the 2 loaves offering on Shavuot come from the first fruits. Also, in the day of the first fruits, when you bring a new meal offering to the Lord in your Feast of Weeks in Numbers 28:26, if the is from wheat, then the 2 loaves offering would not be the first offering of the first fruit, as the offering of Passover precedes it. Therefore, it must come from barley. Rabbi explains the objection of Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. Evidently, the offering is brought from the new crop because the grain used is referred to as first fruits, the first of your harvest. The Gemara concludes this Brisa is a conclusive refutation to Uvta. An Amoraic statement can be refuted on the basis of a Tanaic source that contradiction. This word to Uvta is one of several terms based on the same Aramaic root. For example, where one Amora raises objection to the opinion of another Amora by citing a Tanaic source, which he uses Meitive, meaning one sage raises an objection to another sage's opinion. When a Amora raises an objection against an unattributed Amoric opinion, like the Celtic expression employed is mativ, and Rabbi X raises an objection, then what itself raises an objection, the objection by citing a Tanaic source, the expression uses Meitive, where there is no response to the objection, with a single conclusive refutation, and the term to Yufta is used. Often, although not in this case, it is repeated both before and after the name of the Amor, effectively disqualifying his opinion. We learn in the Mishnah elsewhere, Quran 1:3, one may bring first fruits only from the 7 species, and Mevim B'Korim put Meshivas Haminin. The mitzvah to bring the first fruits applies to the 7 species with which Yeshua is praised. We are wheat, barley, grapes, dates, pomegranates, olives, and dates. If we bring the other species, attains the first stage of first fruits. Mission B'Korim. What I'm going to say for the rhyme, B'Korim 2:2. With which Yeshua is praised in the verse, the land of wheat, barley, vines, figs, and pomegranates, and land of olive oil and honey. The 8th, one may not. That's in the Omid. That's in the Omid. Thank you for listening, and all the best. Bye.